What if the truth Prince William had been quietly seeking for decades was hidden away in a room no one had entered for over 27 years? In the still, shadowed corners of Kensington Palace, during preparations for a 2024 renovation, William stumbled upon something no one imagined still existed. It was a secret diary, Princess Diana's, concealed behind a false panel in her private study. The entries were raw and unguarded, written in the final year of her life. But they weren't only reflections. They were predictions, confessions, and a direct challenge to the monarchy itself. This wasn't just a piece of royal history. It was a revelation that could upend everything we thought we knew about Diana's last days, her quiet battle with the system, and the legacy she fought to protect for her sons. Stay with us as we open the diary never meant to see the light of day. Like, share, and subscribe, because some truths deserve to be heard. Kensington Palace has always been steeped in memory. Every corridor, every heavy curtain, every echo off its polished marble floors carried traces of those who once walked its halls. But on a quiet spring morning in 2024, William found himself in a section of the palace long untouched, a small sunlit room tucked away behind a carved oak door at the far end of the east wing. It had belonged to his mother. Diana's private study had remained sealed for almost 3 decades, preserved under an unspoken royal agreement, and somehow missed during every previous redecoration. Now it was being emptied in preparation for work, a decision William had agreed to without much thought. Stepping inside, he was struck by the scent, a mix of aged paper, faded rose perfume, and dust. The room still held pieces of her life, books neatly on the shelves, faded sticky notes in her handwriting clinging to old photographs and magazine pages, and her favorite fountain pen resting in its holder, as though she might return at any moment. But what lay hidden under her desk would change everything. While inspecting the antique mahogany writing desk, its surface worn from years of use, William noticed a thin seam along the lower panel. He pressed gently. Click. The panel swung open. Inside, wrapped carefully in an old silk scarf, was a leather-bound journal. Its spine was worn and cracked, the leather soft at the edges from years of handling. Stamped in fading gold across the cover were the simple words, DMS 1996. William felt his breath catch. For a long moment, he just sat there, holding it, the weight of nearly 3 decades pressing down on him. It had been 27 years since his mother's death. He was only 15 then. The woman whose thoughts filled these pages was someone he loved deeply, yet was only beginning to truly understand. Was it right to open something so private? Would she have wanted him to? Grief wrapped around him like a heavy cloak. This was more than a diary. It was her voice, her final truths, sealed away and lost to time. Slowly, almost ceremoniously, William opened the cover. What he found inside shattered much of what he thought he knew, not only about his mother's death, but about the monarchy she had fought to break free from. Diana's final confessions spilled across the pages in her unmistakable handwriting, unfiltered, deeply personal, unlike anything the public had ever seen. These weren't carefully crafted statements for the press or polished words for a memoir. They were raw, midnight confessions, written in solitude, carved from loneliness and a relentless search for honesty inside a gilded prison. She wrote of her marriage with heartbreaking clarity, never as an attack, but as an admission. "I think I loved him more than he could ever love me," she wrote in January 1997. But love cannot survive in a palace built on silence. She spoke of feeling emotionally abandoned, the crushing expectations of the public set against the emptiness of her private life. Yet the passages that struck William the hardest were not about her marriage, they were about her children. Page after page, she poured out her fear for William and Harry. "My boys are so young, yet I feel time is against me. An institution is shaping them before they can even find their own voices. Guilt bled through her words. I fear I have failed them. Not for lack of love, but because I was never allowed to mother them the way I needed to. I wish I could have prepared them better for the life they will inherit. I wish I had more time. I wish I could shield them from what's coming. And then came the most chilling part, her gaze turning toward the future. Not out of paranoia, but with clear eyes, she wrote. If anything happens to me, they will call it an accident. But I know too much, and I speak too openly. Change is coming. Darkness cloaked in tradition. She never named names, but the urgency in her tone was unmistakable. Her warning was stark. The crown will not protect my sons. The world will celebrate them, but it will never truly understand them. I hope they find each other when I'm gone. The words caught in William's throat. His mother had written with fear, guilt, and an almost brutal self-awareness. The most heartbreaking truth was that Diana didn't see herself as both princess and mother. She felt forced to choose. I have to perform for the cameras, smile for the crowds, and then vanish behind the palace walls, she wrote. But who holds me when I cry? In those lines, William came face to face with a side of his mother he had never truly known. A woman split in two. Halfway through the diary, the tone shifted. What began as deeply personal reflections sharpened into something colder, more deliberate. Diana's handwriting became tighter, almost rushed, as though driven by nervous urgency. William felt the change instantly. This was no longer just the private lament of a grieving mother. It was a dossier, a mission, a warning. Diana had been documenting everything. She wrote of certain figures within the palace, senior advisors, courtiers, and unnamed aides, whom she believed were engineering a quiet campaign to sideline her and limit her influence. She listed dates of meetings she had been shut out of, conversations that went silent when she entered the room, and key decisions that ignored her position as the mother of a future king. They think I'm emotional, but I'm observant, she wrote, and I'm writing it all down. Some names were instantly familiar to William, others he didn't recognize. She described how tabloid scandals were carefully planted to undermine her, how stories were leaked with surgical precision. I trusted too easily. Some smiles were masks. I know better now, she confided in April 1997. Her voice on the page grew more strategic. She wasn't acting alone. There were allies, a trusted investigative journalist, a former security officer, and a discreet solicitor who advised her on what to keep and where to hide it. She wrote about clandestine meetings in underground parking garages, calls made from payphones, and letters hidden beneath floorboards. They said I was paranoid, she wrote in June, but I'm not imagining the cars that follow me. I hear the clicks on the phone line. I see the same faces in different cities. Then came the entry that froze William's blood, dated just 3 days before her death. If anything happens to me, this will explain everything. Tell my boys I tried. I wasn't perfect, but I was awake. I did not tiptoe. He read it again and again. The woman who had held him close as a child had spent her final months in fear, planning, recording, fighting battles no one saw. Now, decades later, the proof was in his hands. If he revealed it, the monarchy could fracture. If he stayed silent, her mission and her warnings might die with him. For the first time in his life, William wasn't just a prince. He was the keeper of his mother's unfinished war and Harry's unknown truth. Then, as he turned the next page, a single sentence stopped him cold. He read it once, then again, slower, making sure he hadn't imagined it. I've told Harry the truth. He must carry it until he's ready. The line was dated late July 1997, barely a month before Diana's death. The truth. But what truth? What followed in her diary was cryptic, almost deliberately elusive. Diana wrote in loops, hinting at a long-buried family secret, one she had entrusted only to her younger son. "Harry is still so young," she wrote, "but I see something in him. A resilience, a defiance the monarchy won't mold as easily. I've told him something William isn't ready to hear. For William, the words felt like a betrayal captured in ink. His chest tightened. He had spent his whole life bearing the weight of being heir, future king, symbol of duty, bound by expectation. Now he was learning that his mother had made Harry the keeper of a truth she had denied him. It reopened wounds he thought had long since scarred over. He read on. Diana described preparing each of her sons differently for the roles she believed awaited them. William needs strength. He will be king, and they will try to break him with formality. Harry needs truth. He will walk beyond the palace walls and face the world without armor. Her love was unmistakable, but her methods had been uneven, intentional, yet unequal. The next day, William couldn't keep it in. He called Harry. The conversation started politely, but tension lingered like a shadow. William asked plainly, "What did Mom tell you?" There was a long silence before Harry answered, his voice calm but heavy. "I always thought she told you too." It wasn't a full confession, but enough to deepen the distance between them. Harry admitted that Diana had once shared something deeply personal about the family's history, something she made him swear never to repeat. "She said you'd understand when the time came," Harry offered. But that time had never come. Diana was gone, and whatever chance they had to share that truth had died with her. The gap between the brothers, already strained, widened further. That evening, William sat alone in the same chair where he had first opened the diary. The palace was silent, but his mind roared with questions. The revelation hadn't just divided him from Harry. It had made him feel the weight of every unfinished conversation with his mother, every question he had never asked. In trying to protect them, Diana had left her sons holding separate fragments of a shattered truth. The deeper William read, the more the diary transformed from a grieving mother's journal into something resembling an intelligence file. Names, dates, and incidents filled the pages, proof that Diana had been quietly building a case against members of the royal inner circle. She hadn't merely suspected betrayal. She had documented it. Her notes were precise. Meetings she had been deliberately excluded from, press releases rewritten behind her back, and critical decisions made without her knowledge, all carefully recorded in her hand. "They have no crown, but they hold the reins," she wrote. "They smile at me in daylight and tighten the cage at night." These weren't emotional outbursts. They were meticulous observations, logged with dates, details, and patterns that revealed a deliberate system of silencing. Diana named names. At least 4 senior courtiers appeared repeatedly in her entries, some of whom William recognized immediately. She accused them of actively working to weaken her public role and limit her influence over her son's upbringing. According to her notes, they leaked personal details to the press, shaped damaging narratives, and portrayed her as unstable to justify removing her from key decisions. "The portrait they paint of me is not who I am," she wrote, "but it serves them. It always has." What chilled William wasn't just what his mother had written back in 1997. It was the fact that some of those same individuals still held positions of power within the monarchy. 27 years later, the machinery she had fought against was still in motion. These were people who had advised him in recent years, the very voices he had trusted. The realization hit hard. His anger wasn't the quick, prideful rage of a prince insulted. It was the deep, aching fury of a son who finally understood the scale of what his mother had endured. Diana hadn't been paranoid. She had been observant. She hadn't been dramatic. She had been desperate to be heard. William closed the diary slowly and gazed out the palace window. Outside, life went on. guards pacing their posts, tourists gathering at the gates. But inside him, everything had shifted. Now came the impossible question. What should he do with this knowledge? Revealing Diana's findings could destabilize the monarchy and cast doubt on the integrity of the institution he was destined to lead. Yet staying silent would mean becoming complicit in the same cover-up that had nearly destroyed his mother. The truth was now his burden, the same burden Diana had carried alone. William had always known his parents' marriage was troubled. The world had seen it unravel in headlines and televised interviews, reduced to gossip and sound bites. But as he read deeper into his mother's diary, a more complicated story began to take shape, one that unsettled every conclusion he thought he had drawn. Diana's words revealed not only her own pain, but moments when her perspective on Charles had begun to shift, especially in the final year of her life. Between accounts of betrayal and loneliness, she recorded unexpected gestures, a handwritten note from Charles in late 1996, a quiet, almost tender conversation at a charity event in early 1997, even a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite, left at her doorstep without a name. "I think they were from him," she wrote, "but I was too angry to ask." Diana reflected on how easily those moments could be misread, how years of resentment had clouded their ability to truly see one another. "We both built walls too high, and by the time we tried to climb them, we'd forgotten why they were built at all." She even wondered if reconciliation had ever been possible, not as husband and wife, but as two parents trying to mend something for the sake of their sons. Then came the line that stopped William in his tracks. "Maybe we were both victims of the same machine." It was an admission he never expected. In her most unguarded moments, Diana acknowledged that Charles, too, had been swallowed by the relentless demands of the monarchy. "He had no choice either," she wrote. "Born into duty, taught to suppress emotion, praised for silence, punished for softness." It was a rare and devastating empathy, one wounded soul recognizing the quiet suffering of another. For William, the impact was immediate. He had always seen his father through the lens of his mother's pain, distant, cold, even complicit. But now, decades later, he began to picture a man trapped by tradition just as Diana had been, a man who may have reached out in subtle ways, only to go unheard. The father he had once resented now appeared more human, more fragile, and far more damaged than he'd allowed himself to believe. With that realization came fear. Was he, too, becoming a polished figure carried along by the same royal current? Was he raising his children in a world where duty could once again smother authenticity? In understanding the sorrow his parents shared, William saw the warning clearly. Their pain wasn't just history. It was a prophecy, and he would have to decide whether to repeat it or break it. By the time William reached the later pages of his mother's diary, her voice had sharpened again, this time with a precise, almost investigative edge. Diana was no longer writing only about personal pain or family conflict. She was laying out the mechanics of how her public image had been dismantled. It hadn't been random. It had been deliberate, piece by piece, headline by headline. In an entry dated March 1997, she wrote, "They're not just leaking, they're orchestrating." Diana detailed how palace insiders, particularly senior aides aligned with certain courtiers, worked hand-in-hand with select journalists. Stories would surface in tabloids within days of private disputes inside the palace, many twisted beyond recognition or wholly fabricated. "They need a villain, and I play the role well," she added bitterly. Her notes were meticulous, identifying patterns of manipulation. Confidential conversations that appeared verbatim in print, old letters suddenly reappearing, and strategically chosen photographs designed to portray her as unstable, reckless, or unfit. This wasn't paranoia. It was a playbook, and she had been tracking every move. "I cry in the car and they call it hysteria." I play with my sons and they call it manipulation. The narrative, Diana believed, had never truly been hers to control, but the deepest cuts came from betrayal. She named people she had once called friends, stylists, assistants, even fellow charity patrons, who had sold her out to the press for cash, access, or favor within palace circles. "Trust is a currency they all trade," she wrote, "and I keep running out." Some of the leaks were trivial, others painfully personal, but the message was always the same. Diana was a problem to be contained. As William read, the pattern became undeniable. This wasn't random. It was a system, a calculated, repetitive machine. The very same tactics used to destroy his mother's reputation were still in motion, now recycled in his own life. He had seen it with Catherine. Whispered rumors of marital strain, unflattering mid-blink photographs twisted into scandal, articles padded with quotes from so-called unnamed palace sources. He had seen it with Harry and Meghan, too, the same press playbook driving wedges between family members and the world. For the first time, William truly understood his mother's media paranoia. She hadn't been fragile. She had been surrounded. She hadn't imagined enemies. They had names, phone extensions, and press passes, and the machine that fed on her was still very much alive. He stared at the final pages, jaw set. The same forces that had haunted his mother's last days were still whispering in corridors, shaping stories, and feeding on royal blood. But now he could see them clearly, and for the first time, he was ready to fight back. Not just for his mother's memory, but for his own family's future. Just when William thought he had reached the end of his mother's words, something unusual caught his eye. The leather on the diary's back cover felt thicker, a faint lift at the seam. Running his fingers along the edge, he felt it give way with a soft pop. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper, yellowed slightly with time. The ink had faded, but the heading was still clear. "To my sons." It was undated and unfinished, only a few paragraphs long, but it carried more weight than anything William had read before. Diana's tone here was soft, unguarded, entirely mother rather than monarch. "If you are reading this, then I didn't get to say all I wanted to," it began. "I am sorry. I'm sorry for the pressure you'll inherit, for the walls you'll live within, and for the parts of me you never got to know." It was, William realized, an apology wrapped in love. "I made choices to survive. Some were right, some were wrong. But every step I took was to give you a future with more honesty than I had." She offered no excuses. She placed no blame. She simply set down her truth in the clearest words a mother could give her children. Then came what felt like her final gift: wisdom. "Don't let the crown steal your kindness," she wrote. "Don't become so polished that the world can't see your soul. Power will try to make you distant. Stay human." She urged her sons to speak up, to feel deeply, to love openly. They will tell you emotion is weakness. Prove them wrong. And then came the promise. "I believe one day you will change it all. You will break the silence that broke me. You will make this monarchy into something I never got to see, a place where truth is not punished and hearts are not hidden." The letter ended there. No signature, no farewell. Just a half-finished sentence and a faint smudge, as if her pen had paused mid-thought and never returned. William pressed the page to his chest, his breath uneven. The tears came fast, not only from grief, but from the weight of knowing these were his mother's final words to her sons, unfinished, yet complete in their call to action. Alone in her study, the same room where she had once dreamed of escape, William made his decision. He would carry her mission forward. Quietly at first, but fully. Diana had lit a flame in the dark. Now it was his turn to keep it burning. In the weeks after discovering his mother's diary, William returned to Kensington Palace no longer just a grieving son, but a man with a plan. Diana's words had not merely stirred sorrow, they had brought him clarity. For the first time in his life, he knew exactly what had to be done. There would be no press conferences, no explosive interviews, no theatrical leaks. His mother had been destroyed for speaking too loudly. William would move differently, silently, but with precision. He gathered a small, trusted circle. Each received fragments of Diana's diary, coded names, dates, and timelines, and began quiet inquiries into the advisors she had once feared. Within months, the changes were visible. Long-entrenched courtiers, people who had quietly wielded power for decades, began retiring unexpectedly or were discreetly reassigned. No explanations were offered, but within palace walls, it was understood. William was reshaping the institution from within. Yet even with progress, one matter still pulled at him: his brother. The call to Harry wasn't easy. Their relationship had been fractured for years, but this time, William reached out not as the heir to the throne, but as a son. He read Harry their mother's unfinished letter. He apologized for the anger between them. For the first time in a long while, the two brothers spoke without titles or protocol, just as sons bound by memory, grief, and the shared ache of having loved Diana. It was a start. And together, they agreed on one thing: their mother's legacy would not be forgotten. Not as a shrine to grief, but as a blueprint for renewal. Diana had always imagined a monarchy that felt more human, and William began turning that vision into reality, not only in private strategy, but in the way he carried himself. There was more openness, more authenticity, less of the untouchable formality that had long defined royal life. Royal tours shifted from staged ceremony to genuine connection. Interviews felt like conversations rather than rehearsed statements. Slowly, the crown, once a symbol of distance, began to radiate a quieter warmth. Diana's diary, once hidden behind a false panel, became William's silent guide for a new era. In private, he had it carefully rebound and placed in a small glass case in his study, not as a showpiece, but as a daily reminder. "You did not die in vain," he whispered the first time he opened it again. "You showed me the cracks. Now I will mend them." In that moment, he felt a kind of closure. The young woman who once danced barefoot in palace corridors, who wept behind locked doors, who wrote by candlelight to sons she feared might lose themselves to the system, she had not been erased. Her voice was no longer hidden. Her mission now had its champion. The reckoning had come, and with it, the future Diana had dreamed of began to take shape. Diana once said, "Only do what your heart tells you." In the end, it was her heart, spilled onto diary pages, tucked behind wood panels, whispered in unfinished letters, that changed everything. Her legacy was never just about elegance or tragedy. It was about truth, about love, about a mother's fierce determination to protect her sons from the institution that nearly consumed her. Today, that fight continues, not as open rebellion, but as quiet, deliberate reform. William didn't simply grieve for his mother. He listened to her, and in doing so, he started to rewrite the future she once feared. This is not just a royal story, it's a human one, a reminder that healing often begins the moment silence ends. If this story touched something in you, share it. Let Diana's voice reach others still learning how to speak their own truth. Her light was never extinguished. It simply waited for the right moment to shine.